We'll start here. So this is Steve Hansen from Wiz Community, and I am here today with Jodie Arnold and Tyler Haas from the Cool and Unusual Punishment podcast. And we're going to talk a little bit about their podcast and about Luginbilled, the story or the series of podcasts they've been running about Joe Luginbill and his mysterious disappearance from the Eau Claire area. And welcome to both of you.
Thanks.
Hi, thanks for having us.
So, the first thing I want to ask is since you've been doing this podcast for a while and it's, been mostly about scary things and things that go creep in the night and that sort of thing, how did you suddenly veer off into this direction?
Yeah, there was a big pivot.
Yeah, it was a bit of a hairpin turn.
Yeah, I had previously done a podcast with a similar format called Tell Me Something Weird. And when that dissolved, Tyler and I had talked about doing our own thing. And so we had started just kind of mirroring that same format where we would, do each tell the other a story, it's usually with like a Wisconsin type slant to it. And then what happened was I had some connections in the Eau Claire area. And thanks to those connections, I had been made aware before it hit the media that there had been this large Xcel Energy bill that had been put on the door of the State Theater. And I thought to myself, like, it feels like there's something more going on with this story than just an Xcel Energy bill. Like, I just had like a very deep suspicion that something else was going on. And so I started talking to a few of the connections. And in some of those early episodes, some of my sources were anonymous, trusted, but anonymous. And I just told Tyler, like, we have to do this like right now. Like
I'd never heard Joe's name before we did that first episode. And I remember you having like getting this information and then just being really adamant that like we have to get this out like as soon as possible. We have to record it now and get it out. And I didn't know why. I just like you'd never had that kind of like resolved to like no, you don't understand. Like we have to. I didn't realize what we were putting it out in this like window where I would come to realize that like everyone was like, well, like wait, what's even happening? Like it was kind of everyone. Nobody hated Joe or anything. Like kind of by and large, and you made me. You're like, you have to finish it. We have to get out right now, and then we did, and we were like the first ones to come out and like have an answer. And but I did all that not knowing who Joe was at all. Like, all right, let's do it.
Yeah. And I mean, as we've come to discover, I mean, it wasn't so much an issue in the beginning of nobody hated Joe. It was that there were a lot of people that had experiences with Joe that hadn't, until our podcast come along, had a platform for talking about them or felt safe enough to share them, because it was, for a long time, he was a pretty big pillar of the community. And it's kind of a David and Goliath situation where it's like, well, this thing happened to me, but I either through threats or eventual resolution or he disappears, like they just didn't know what to do with it. And so they just kind of shrugged their shoulders, and a lot of people felt shame and betrayal, but then they just kind of buried it because the overall story in Eau Claire was that this was Joe Luginbill and he can't do any wrong, and look at his amazing track record of accomplishments he's had. And who am I to say like that he's done something less than stellar? So yeah, I had gotten that information about the letter that's in like the first episode and the second episode about the Eau Claire City Council president. And I got that from several sources and felt very comfortable doing that episode. And then we just started getting a literal storm of people reaching out to us saying, I had this thing happen. this is the story of what happened with the Smile House. And then suddenly I just started to realize more and more that it was effectively a house of cards built on nothing. And all of these people were coming forward with their experiences, and suddenly it became a series. It wasn't, I had no idea it was going to happen like the way it happened. It just kept happening.
Well, as somebody who, knew Joe only very casually for several years, I have to admit that I, liked him and had a fair amount of respect for him. And then there was this sudden explosion of projects in Eau Claire. And it made me wonder, because I never saw any real evidence of, fundraising in any serious way, or
Hmm.
where that money might have been coming from. And that made me a little uneasy. But as you pointed out, Joe was just always so capable of sounding on the up and up. He was
Yeah.
really good at that. I'm sure still is. And had a level of, well, he had a level of self-promotion that always, I guess, I simultaneously admired and was bothered by, because, I was a little jealous because I know I can't do that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it would be really nice if I could, especially when I try and fund things. But
Yeah.
uh, so so you ended up doing this story, and I was at the same time, doing a lot of writing about this too, because one day, there was the day that all of a sudden all hell broke loose, and I found myself over in Eau Claire with my pickup truck, helping the LGBTQ people to move out of their office in the cold and dark, because
Yeah.
because I had a pickup truck and they couldn't find anybody else who did. So we were moving tables and furniture out of there. And it just, that was, I think, was when it hit me that this is just like really odd. And I started writing about it. And then, of course, you started doing your podcast, which uh, filled in a bunch of holes, I think, although there's plenty of holes still to this day, and I'm sure will continue to be.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are a lot of people in the area who have really good, kind feelings about Joe. And I have gotten some flack from people about, particularly the last story I wrote about your last podcast episode, which basically just said, stuff's happened, go listen to these people and they'll tell you about it. Um, I've been a little surprised at how much of the just leave him alone. Why are you persecuting him? And I'm sure you've probably heard some of that too.
Yeah, we haven't gotten, I mean, surprisingly enough, while we've gotten more, uh, I thought we were done with the series, but then something that came through the tip line definitely means we're not done with the series. So that happened. We haven't gotten like a lot of specific uh, messages like that. I will say that when people respond to our stuff on our page, sometimes I tend to not engage with it because that's a forum for conversation, but that doesn't mean that I need to be involved in it. But I have seen that sentiment about just leave him alone. And, to speak to that, I guess if we talk about the whole series, right? My feeling was that Joe Luginbill manipulated the media in for years. If we've now come to discover that a lot of these things from the very beginning are questionable when it goes to verifying if they ever really happened, was he didn't really interview Cardinal, the stuff with Martha Stewart, like he called into a radio show. Like if we go and look at all of those things, it was always like a nugget of something that he built on. And well, at the time, the local media just took him at his word and, created this foundation. And so anyway, I felt like really strongly that there were so many people damaged on his account, whether or not it was intentional at times. I thought that those people deserved time with media in the same way that he got without question for years. So if somebody comes to me and they got, I mean, the story of Sarah Strunk with the Smile House is one that I think about often. And it's really heartbreaking to listen to these people. And they deserve to have a voice. And, I mean, I told Tyler several times, Ted Bundy worked in a suicide prevention call center next to Anne Rule for years, and she thought he was a nice guy. I mean, your personal experience with somebody that speaks to your personal interaction. That doesn't mean that that person can't also be a bad person or have done bad things just because, you think, well, I talked to them and they seemed like a nice guy and I don't know what the deal is. It's like, okay, well, that's a very narrow perspective. You do have to remember that he had interactions with lots of people, and it's undisputed that not everybody had that experience.
Well, yeah, not only that, but like a lot of the stories you told were people that liked him quite a bit the whole time they were being taken advantage of, and like that was made possible by how much everyone liked Joe, and like, yeah, of course he was very likable. That's like Sarah did all that, like, by and large, because she was like loved the mission, believed in Joe, and it's like, yeah, everybody, he's very charming. Everybody liked him or likes him. Like, if you're not being like financially leveraged or taken advantage of by him, then yeah, I have no doubt that you would think about him now and be like, yeah, Joe was always a great guy. Why would you think anything else? Like,
yeah, right. And, it is interesting, like with most of the stories we had, that people started out with good intentions. They had like at least verbal support from Joe, but there always came a point, generally it would be financial, or when there was some sort of accountability required, contractual or, something like that. And then he would bolt, And so you would notice in all of these stories, there does come a point when people would start to feel uncomfortable about him and his promises and expectations of what he was going to do for them. And then they questioned it, but then said to themselves, well, this is Joe Luginbill. He has money because that's what we've all come to believe, and he'll come through on this. And I just need to stuff these feelings down and, trust the project. And so, when people say just leave him alone, I mean, I don't know. That's like saying, to me, underneath that is you saying to the people that are damaged that their stories don't matter. This isn't a witch hunt on Joe Luginbill. This is understanding the layers of deception with this guy and the people that were affected by it, and then letting those people finally have their time to talk about it. He got his time, a lot of it, that wasn't warranted all the time. And I think it's only fair to these people for them to allow them the space to talk about what happened in their experience.
Sure. I think one of the unfortunate things that happens in cases like this is it really muddies the waters. People see things like this happen, and then the next time there really is a good cause to give to, or something to support, or a project you can go out and volunteer for, I think sometimes people just kind of go like, yeah, well, maybe I'm a little worried about where this is going, and I want to see transparency for it. And sometimes that means people want like this ludicrous amount of transparency when frankly, I think in Joe Luginbill's case, any transparency at all would have been a big improvement. That always kind of bothered me right down the line. I also suspect you probably get a little bit of pushback from people because, you're not the New York Times, right? And neither am I. And sometimes, if you're doing a podcast and you're having maybe a little fun in the podcast while you're doing it, people think, yeah, well, it's not serious journalism. And,
Yeah.
I mean, I hear that too, so I understand the issue.
I don't know how much it ever comes across in the end product, but for what it's worth, when we record, it's like twice as long when we record than what, you know, we end up putting out. And then I like, when I sit down to edit, the amount of thought I put into like how much cussing do I have to cut out, how many like dumb jokes do I have to cut out, how do I make it feel natural without like, because we don't pretend to be the New York Times or anything. We're pretty upfront about what, you know, that we're nobodies who and what we know and don't know, and that it feels appropriate for us to be casual about it when it's appropriate, and then I'll have to go through and listen and be like, wait, are we like, oh, that was really sad, are we laughing too quickly after that? Do I need to? Yeah, I was always wondering what, like, it's always a thing I thought about, because I wanted the podcast to sound like serial, basically. Like, I wanted it to be professional, that if I'm undermining it with like, do I make all this like not serious if I leave in a joke or something?
Yeah, I mean, you can have a serious topic and have funny moments. I mean, you know, that's like most, if we just told stories, you know, there needs to be some sort of relief, because there are funny moments, even when it's serious. You know, we're not laughing when Sarah Strunk is, you know, just really left to deal with the aftermath of what happened at the State Theater. But, you know, there's funny things that we see on biographies and things like that. And so I think that's okay. And I do think that the level of paranoid fact checking, and, you know, I have a lawyer that I consult with, like the level of making sure that what I'm presenting is correct and I can do it, and that it's fact checked and reliable, is like, you know, I do think that the standards of the journalistic standards are quite high in that regard. I would never share a story if I didn't know it was true, and I wouldn't share information if I didn't have paper to back it up. And when I have an anonymous source, I have to feel like it's trusted and corroborated with somebody else, you know, depending on what it is. And so I do think that we've applied serious standards to it, but just used this format that's not, you know, like listening to the New York Times. And if somebody doesn't like that, well, you know, they don't have to listen to it.
Well, we're in a funny period right now where, you know, journalism's in this giant stage of flux, and all the traditional media are kind of falling apart around our ears.
Yeah.
Nobody has any money. You know, all that advertising revenue newspapers used to have is gone with the wind. And so there are a lot of people trying to kind of plug those gaps. I mean, I'm one of those. Dunn County's become largely a news desert, even though we sort of still have a paper here. It's an interesting time, and it's, you know, sometimes really challenging, and God knows it's financially challenging, because even operations that don't have, you know, huge expenses, like my gigantic salary, is not really weighing down my operation. I'm sure yours isn't either.
Yeah, I mean, we both have day jobs.
Well, I'm theoretically retired, although I'm putting in more hours, I think, than I used to when I was working full time. So it's all a challenge. And you know, there are different expressions there and different ways things come out. Um, I I used to write a lot of satire, and I'm finding that really difficult these days, because the reality
Yeah.
is so much stranger than anything I can think up.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's nice about the podcast, you know, is that, I mean, there, people would often criticize, like, why isn't anybody else doing this story, or things like that. But, you know, the reality is that the Leader Telegram, the Eau Claire Leader Telegram, which is our local paper in Eau Claire, has been pretty well gutted. You know, they don't have the staff they used to have. They've had salaries cut. There just aren't people available to do the kind of singular topic digging that we've been
For an
doing.
entire year. Yeah.
Yeah. And also the column space, you know, so we can give somebody as much time as they need to tell the story. And, you know, so that's nice to have that freedom of like, well, this is our podcast. And so we can decide how long it's going to be. And, you know, if we're going to talk about the Smile House for 35 minutes, well, that's what's happening this week. And, you know, the most of the response we get is positive, you know, but I'm sure there are a lot of people who hate it and just haven't felt compelled to tell me personally. But that's how it goes with anything. So, you know.
Sometimes you find yourself longing for feedback, good, bad, or whatever. I mean, I know I hear so little back from my readers. I know they're reading it,
Yeah.
but I don't know what they think.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm doing this all wrong. I've got no idea sometimes. There is something really freeing about, you know, digital media of any form. Like you said, you don't have to worry about, well, that's too many column inches. I gotta cut this way down. And although there's an advantage to having that discipline, because it does keep you from rambling on and on.
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
what
so some,
editing's for.
Yeah,
But also-
that was the other principle of our podcast was to vacuum out all the narcissism and fart smelling that is like baked into podcasts. That like, well, if anybody's going to listen to this, it can't be sprinkled in between 2 hours of us like drinking and shooting the shit. Like, oh, we gotta.
Yeah.
we gotta
Nobody wants to
condense.
listen to that. Everybody thinks that's going to be interesting, but they want to listen to you tell a very specific, you know, like you have a topic and you stick on it and you don't make it too long, but you also don't have to stress about, you know, well, and also like you, I'm not sure if you have, but like we're not beholden to advertisers, because I'm sure there are people who wouldn't even dare want to advertise because they think this is too controversial or something, when honestly it's true stories about things that happened, that all happened about one person, which is, you know, when you really think about it, how many times could you have a whole year of a podcast about the different experiences, negative experiences that people all had coming at different directions about one person who sold themselves so differently? I mean, it's such an unusual thing that happened, you know, like, oh, there's our cat feeder going off. But, you know, I mean, there was just something very unique about this person and the kind of wreckage they left. And so a podcast has been a really nice format for getting to dig into it, you know.
Yeah, it's difficult. I have a podcast that comes and goes. This may be actually become an episode of it at some point, but and I'm doing that all wrong, obviously, because you know you're supposed to like do them on a regular basis, and oh man,
Yeah.
I just can't.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. You have to be disciplined. And, you know, with our podcast, there was some sporadic element to them because I was doing the investigating and researching as we went. So it wasn't like we had, you know, like an episode was scheduled in 2 weeks. You know, it was me getting a lead and chasing it down, and how quickly before I felt confident that I had a story, could we do it, you know? So yeah, that part is different when you do a podcast like this. It's not like, you know, you can say every Thursday we're going to have one out. It's like, no, that just wouldn't have worked, you know?
So you mentioned in the podcast that you got some new stories coming up. Are you willing to say anything about where things are going?
Here's our list if you want to.
Yeah, well,
read over and see if there's any you can talk
I mean,
about.
like, well, we have another large series that we're going to do that involves a spiritual group.
Yeah, and it was actually like we were actively researching it, but like it's been kind of percolating for 2 years.
Yeah.
Like just kind of in the background, and after doing Luginbilled, we're like, oh, we now have the perfect format to talk about this the right way.
Yeah, because it's I mean, like without giving too much away, it involves unusual land purchases, deathbed will, huge court case that's still in the courts and has been for years. You know, a small town with the question mark of it being overwhelmed by something that they don't quite understand. And it's happening within a couple of hours from here. And there's a couple of parallels, I'd say, to a documentary called Wild Wild Country about a town that kind of gets overrun by something. And so that's going to require a lot of work, but we have done a lot of work and gone to the Rusk County, well, it's in Rusk County, I just said, Rusk County Courthouse, and looked into this court case, and it's absolutely wild. And so, and really interesting and thought-provoking, I think. And so that will be our next series. But then I've got a missing persons case I've been working with a family on for 4 years. So hopefully at some point that can become a series like this too. So yeah.
Part of the problem with doing investigative stuff, it takes a lot of resources and it takes forever sometimes. I'm always amazed because, you know, people think of us as flyover country, and, you know, especially, you know, I live on this farm in the middle of nowhere and nothing ever happens, you know, and anybody who lives in these small areas realizes all kinds of things happen. And sometimes some of them are really interesting. I had the odd experience a few weeks ago of, and I don't usually do crime stories because it's just not, you know, it's not in my thoughts, and it's a level of stuff that actually does get done around here. But
Yeah.
I got in my truck and I'm driving up into Menominee, and this kind of derelict trailer that's been sitting there forever, it has crime tape all around it and a million cops and people from the state and federal agents. And I was a little flabbergasted, you know, things just occur. And, you know, well, I assumed it was a murder scene, and it was, and kind of a nasty murder scene, apparently. But, you know, I could not get anybody to talk to me about it, including the sheriff's office, until they did a press release several days later. So, you know, there's plenty of stuff that happens. I know when I was doing some work with frac sand mining around here, there were some pretty interesting things going on with, you know, little town boards and some financial irregularities and people on the board steering things in their direction. There's a lot of that goes on.
Yeah, I feel like you find like little towns have a lot of the same political fights and the same like power struggles as anywhere else, but they're just like there's such insular little handfuls of families that are like they're like the most fascinating places to
Yeah, and we're both from small towns,
Yeah.
so we can we're familiar. Yeah.
There's often, you know, kind of not a lot of familiarity with things like open meeting laws and that kind of thing. And
Yeah,
sometimes you
right.
just kind of roll your eyes. Well, anyway, so unless you got something else, we've been prattling on here for almost half an hour. Anything you want to close with, or anything you want to tell your listeners? Or
I mean, you know, I guess I mean, I thank you for inviting us on to talk about everything that we've, you know, been up to with the Luginbilled thing. Again, I guess I just want to stress, because this is a persistent suggestion that comes up every once in a while. It is, for my intention was not a witch hunt of Joe Luginbill. My intention was, I guess, an expose, or a space for people who had experiences and also not ever gotten closure. You know, a lot of these people, they just, there was contact and then there wasn't, and they've been left wondering sometimes for years, and so I felt like happy that we could provide that space, and it's only because of those people feeling comfortable that we were able to continue doing the series for so long. And so I am really appreciative of people, trusting us to do their story justice and get the facts right. And those things are super important. If you're going to do something like we did, you better damn well know that you're doing it correctly. Otherwise, you can get sued for it.
I've been wanting to meet the two of you for a while, and unfortunately these days, this is how we meet.
About as good as it gets.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would have said, let's go have a beer or something.
Yeah, I mean, I've got one here, but
well, me too. But
yeah, I worked from home, and I walked literally from my job. And about 5 minutes later, I was like, well, let's do this thing now.
Can I plug the teaser website?
Yeah.
For the next year series. I made a site called whatistheinstitute.com. That was it's supposed to serve as a teaser for the next series. I just haven't figured out what to do with it yet.
Yeah.
But it's out there.
Yeah, so that's what's coming up next. And yeah, we're not going away. So
yeah.
Okay. Well, there are days I consider just packing it in myself. It's like, I got plenty I could do without doing this. And
I mean, there are times when you're doing investigative stuff, it's also hard. We said this was the series finale. Well, now something else has come up that I absolutely must address at some point. I can't say anything about what's happening yet, but it's hard to know when the end is. And
yeah, didn't we did an episode after like episode 3 or 4 of Luginbilled, because we didn't know how long it was going to take, what was going to happen. We're like, do we just keep moving on, because we can't just sit on our hands forever?
Yeah, so
yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah, you just kind of have to follow the story and just see what happens. And people have always ended up coming to us with stuff, and it's like, wow, that's wild. Okay, I guess we've got something else that we can do now. So yeah, it's been a really good experience, good to work on the craft of podcasting and get disciplined, and really appreciate fact checking and all those things that a lot of podcasts don't have to do. You're just talking about some true crime story from Wikipedia. You don't have to worry about the repercussions of what happened if you don't have the story right. And so that's been really good. And then just very heartbreaking at times too, to listen to these stories and then, have to tell them and hope you're doing a good job. So.
All right. Well, I want to thank you both for taking the time with me tonight. And this
Yeah.
will appear sometime or another in some form. There's a lot going on this week.
Yeah.
It's really amazing. Every day I think, well, I can start working on that site redesign again, and then life explodes,
Yeah, right. We know.
Okay. Well, thank you both much.
Yeah, thank you. It was really
Thank you
nice
very
meeting
much.
you.
Nice to meet you too.
Yeah.